headphones, Charles?
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today. Because today we are reacting to yet another one of the Fantology podcast contest brackets. As you may know, throughout the history of the show, we've talked about Fantology podcast. Great guys. They've come on to a couple of our shows. We've come on to their show a few times. They're super awesome, knowledgeable guys in the world of fantasy podcast content creators, so definitely check them out. But something they like to do every month is open up a competition, a bracket of a top 3 of something in fantasy. Last month was top 3 romances, and we have recently released an episode reacting to our submissions to that. And this month we have the top 3 magic systems.
That we do. And those polls are hosted by Fantology on Twitter at Fantology_books. So if you want to check out our entry there, if you want to just monitor these really fun tournaments that Fantology does, a great way to do that is to give them a follow on Twitter. And you can find us under at the FTF Podcast 1 on there too. Yeah. So we're going to get the chance to talk in depth about our 3 top magic systems that we chose, and I feel really good about our entry this time around, Charles.
Yep.
We've yet to make it past maybe the quarters, or maybe this. Have we ever made it to semis in anything? I know we only made it to quarters in the last
That's
time,
a good question. I think we may have won twice one time, but I don't remember.
Twice, like usually, 2 rounds.
We usually don't make it to the semifinals.
Yes, but we're super hopeful. Steven from Fantology, under the Fantology account, sent a tweet to me saying that he thought we had a very good chance with the 3 that we chose. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited. I think these are 3 really awesome ones, and I'm ready to get into them. We're going to keep this conversation really high level in the sense of like, we're not going to spoil anything, basically.
Spoiler-free.
And spoiler-free episode here. So if you are looking for more in-depth discussion of these, we'll kind of sprinkle in recommendations to other episodes that we talked more in depth about these magic systems throughout. But here, maybe it'll be more of like, let's talk about what's so awesome about the magic systems themselves. Mm-hmm. And hopefully build some excitement to read these books if you haven't read these 3 yet. And Charles, do you want to get into, no further ado, tell them what our 3 are? Or
yes, and one more thing I'll just quickly say is if you haven't read any of these series yet, then this might be a good pitch for you to hear. It might convince you to pick one of these up. So if you haven't read these and you like what you hear when we talk about it, highly recommend picking any of these up. These are all master classes and magic systems for one reason or another. So,
well said.
With that being said, let's get into our first one. This one, I think, was the most represented in the contest just by quickly looking it over. It's definitely super iconic. When you say this series, the next thing you say is brilliant magic system, and that can only mean it is the Mistborn trilogy Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson, and that magic system is Allomancy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it gets any more iconic than Allomancy and Mistborn when you're talking about a magic system. I don't know if it gets any more iconic than Brandon Sanderson when you're talking about magic systems. I would go so far as to say it does not get any bigger than Brandon Sanderson's name in a lot of ways has become synonymous with writing incredible, intricate magic systems. And our favorite has, I think I can say that on both our parts here, Charles. Our favorite has let me know. Let me know if I can.
Okay.
Um, Almancy is our favorite of Brandon Sanderson's magic systems,
I
and
can say
that's
that,
why
yeah.
we chose it as one of our top three here. It's this really cool hard magic system, which is probably something that is good for us to explain now. Basically, magic systems exist on a spectrum from soft to hard, is how usually folks speak about in the genre. Soft magic system, I usually think about like Gandalf's powers in The Lord of the Rings, where we don't really know the rules. We don't understand what things they can and what things they can't do exactly, but we get the sense that there is certainly magic and there's certainly powers that could be wielded. And usually, when something is more on that soft end of the magic system where you don't have clearly defined rules, it's not used as much to like solve problems in the novels or in the text themselves.
Hmm.
And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum of magic systems, the hard magic systems, they tend to be very clearly defined with lots of rules that are conveyed to the reader. So maybe there are rules behind the scenes for some soft magic system, but the readers might not know them. And when the reader knows the rules, like in a hard magic system a la Mistborn's Allomancy, then what the author can often do very successfully is solve lots of problems using that magic system in a satisfying way. And that actually draws from Brandon Sanderson's first law of magic, which is your ability to solve problems in a satisfying way is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. And Mistborn sticks out so much here with Allomancy because Sanderson does an amazing job of describing to us how the system works. Basically, there's all sorts of different metals that folks can burn, like ingest and then burn inside their body to be able to use particular sets of powers. And there's a particular metal that's associated with each particular power. For example, pewter gives people like stronger constitution and greater strength and things like that. And there's particular alamant,
Elementic?
yeah, allomantic metals that have all sorts of different powers, and there are mistings who can only use one of those powers. One of your favorite characters there, Charles, is Ham, who is a pewter burner. So
Yes.
he's only capable of burning pewter and giving himself that sort of super strength and super constitution. Well, then there are Mistborn, the titular kind of magic users in this, who can burn all the different metals and kind of combine them together to solve problems, like a burn pewter at the same time as another metal, like I think it's tin, that gives you like very sharp senses.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
10.
yeah. So can be super strong at the same time as having super hearing. And then when you combine all these different metals and what they can do, Sanderson gives us a chance to almost see these as tools in our characters' toolkits. And then we wonder, ooh, how are they going to use this one to solve these problems? It's just so satisfying, so interesting. There's so much depth to this system. And I'll let you go, Charles. I've been talking a while.
No, no, that's really well said. You're on a roll. I think what makes Mistborn kind of next level is it's kind of intricate, but it works and it's really intuitive at the same time. And Sanderson has a masterful way of writing it into the action scenes and into the like problem solving of certain scenes where you understand right away how Allomancy works and how a Mistborn works, and like he's he's built it into this whole world. Like sometimes the economy is affected by certain metals being available, and that's how people can control the economy in some ways. Certain
Yeah.
characters, when they're it's like, okay, well, when they don't have medals, they're just normal people. So a lot of the like intrigue going on could be involved in like, how do we get this person like stripped of medals, or, oh, they're about to run out of medals. And, oh, you can burn this medal right now, but then you won't have it later. So there's all
Yeah.
these really interesting elements to Allomancy that carry the Mistborn story so far. And you get some really exciting action pieces, you get some great mystery pieces, and it all is rooted in how Allomancy as a magic system works. And that's why Mistborn has lived on all these years, even though Sanderson has gone on to write so many amazing New York Times bestselling works since then. Mistborn just stands out as this flagship like masterclass in magic system writing, specifically hard magic system writing. And Sanderson's website has all these great laws of magic that he goes into. Highly recommend checking those out. He describes all the ways in which he approaches magic, and there's 3 laws, and they're all super intricate. We could talk about them all day, and in fact, we already have on an earlier episode, Mistborn and the Art of the Magic System. So definitely want to go check out that episode if you want to hear us get into the weeds of all the laws of magic and how they're brilliantly executed in Mistborn. But for now, just know that there's like the magic system is ingrained into the identity of the Mistborn series, and it makes for some really exciting, intriguing moments in fantasy that have stuck with me after reading tons of books since then.
So true, Charles. And you're making such awesome points that had me thinking about something of why I love Allomancy so much, and just the way Brandon Sanderson does magic in Mistborn in general, which is the way that it's woven into every element of his world. You were just talking about how it's part of the economy and things like that. So it's part of the world building in so many ways beyond just being a magic system. But I was also thinking like it's super woven into the characters and how the characters end up as people.
Yeah.
And it's not a spoiler to say that Breeze is a character who is a soother, can burn brass in order to soothe or dampen other people's emotions. So you could think of like making someone feel less anxious or something like that, if Breeze, or making them feel more, or sorry, he can't make them feel more, but he can make them feel, let's say, less on edge around him in order to make them more susceptible to fetching him wine or
nervous,
something like that.
Less,
right.
Yeah.
And he'll use, but it's shaped him into kind of this like charmer who likes to try to influence people and make them go get him wine, and he's got this sort of charismatic feel to him, and you can't remove that part of his character from the fact that he burns brass and allomantic metal in order to like be a person in Sanderson's world. And it's so interesting because a lot of it's like, I don't know, it's like burning metals is a super cool idea in itself, but what brings it to the next level is like it's a part of every aspect of Mistborn, and including character.
Very well said. I mean, I could talk about Mistborn all day long, and although I hesitate to recommend people go all the way back and listen to our buddy read, just because it was the first buddy read we ever did and we didn't know what we were doing, but they're there. Lots of people do listen to them, so if you want to listen to them, you can. But definitely listen to the Art of the Magic System. Yeah, definitely listen to Art of the Magic System, where we've come a long way in podcasting since then, and that's a really great conversation all about this. But yeah, it's no surprise that this one came up in like half of the entries that are in this bracket. So Allomancy all the way. Another one that came up quite a bit and is in a series that we are in the process of reading right now is this idea of channeling and Wheel of Time, specifically the difference between Sayadar and Sayadin. These are two sides of a magic system. Sayadar, I believe, is the one that women can use, and then Sayadin is the one that the men can use. And they're specific to each gender, but the powers are pretty much the same. They channel energy, but just kind of in different ways, and the ways they approach it are different, and they're different sources of magic. But they can do. I equate it to like they can do Gandalf like stuff in terms of like they can do cool things like you expect mages to do, but it comes from a little bit more in the spectrum. Like it leans more to the hard magic in that there are concrete things we know they can and can't do. We kind of understand the limitations a little bit. So it's interesting to see like the hard magic system kind of progress through from Lord of the Rings to Wheel of Time. And we've talked about it a bunch of times. Some of the reasons why we like some of these channeling characters in Wheel of Time is because they can shoot out a fireball when they need to in an action scene, right? Yeah, they do the things, and Allomancy allows characters to do the thing, and that's super interesting. But what takes it to the next level for me is one, the fact that there's different magic for men and women, and that already is an interesting idea to explore right away. But then the second thing is that the male half of the source has been tainted. It's no spoiler to say at the beginning of this book, any man who can channel is susceptible to going mad, essentially. It's been tainted by the evil Dark Lord, right? So that means that there's no men that really channel anymore, and any that do are discovered by the women who can channel and are what's called stilled, which is when you're cut off from the source. And it's basically like a death sentence, kind of, because once you can channel and you've been stilled, you like have no zest for life anymore, and a lot of people don't survive much longer after being stilled. So it makes for a really interesting social dynamic in this world. You have something where, at one point, men and women channeled equally and they were able to accomplish all these great things, but now there's no men that can channel. Any that do are a target, are considered an enemy. And then you have certain women that can channel that are anti-men at all, and then you have others who are like trying to do things about it, maybe a little more flexible on it. So it's interesting to see that play out. It's interesting to recognize that there's a lot of matriarchal societies as a result in Wheel of Time at the time that you're reading, and it just makes for really cool things. And then, of course, as you can imagine, a 14-book series, Robert Jordan weaves in different kinds of, here's these different magical artifacts that can affect channeling, and there's different things you can cut people off from channeling, or you can have people channel more, or you can channel as a group. Like there's all these different layers to it. After 14 books, you get these layered complexities that most fantasy series usually don't get the opportunity to embrace. And that's, for me, is why Sayadar and Sayadin, the idea of channeling, is such an obvious choice for this magic systems bracket.
That is so well said there, Charles. I'm glad you, as the more experienced Wheel of Time
only
reader,
slightly more.
You've read 11. Well, if you count that you've reread 3 of them now, you've read.
I've read all 14 books. Some of them twice.
Yeah, exactly. So you've read 17 Wheel of Time books, some of which counting twice. So I've only read 3. And this is one of the biggest things that you've always been really passionate about with the Wheel of Time series, and a big reason why you got me to check it out, Charles, is this magic system that I think is a real game changer for the genre in a lot of ways, because it's like we think of these, it's so Lord of the Rings inspired is Wheel of Time. I always place it as like Lord of the Rings inspired, and then the inspiration for so many incredible others other authors who have almost drawn from the way that this the series is overall, but also the way that this magic system works in the series. And I think that it's no secret that Brandon Sanderson, who he said is in a lot of ways who we think of when we think of magic systems, I don't think we would have things like Allomancy and all these other amazing magic systems without Jordan's influence on the genre, and then like Sanderson's influence on the genre through the way he was inspired by Jordan. And I'm really just like grateful for the change. And I've talked in the past about how someone like Gandalf, the soft magic system stuff, I don't think there's objective right or wrong answers to what you prefer between soft or hard magic systems, but I usually tend to lean toward liking the harder magic systems more. And a big reason is like with Gandalf, I'm always like, but what can he do though? He's just kind of here. What's he gonna do? And then it's like, and I have a Brandon Sanderson gif I made that is Brandon Sanderson saying, "What can Gandalf do?" By the way, so I might, if I'm feeling brave, I might drop that on Twitter before this episode. And then I think that what Wheel of Time gives us the opportunity to see more than anything, as we said, they do the things, is someone like Moraine, who it's not a spoiler to say, as we've been saying, we've been trying to be very careful,
Right.
that Moraine can use the power, and she actually does. She actually can like throw fireballs and make the earth shake and all sorts of other interesting things that this magic system allows her to do. And I think it's such an influential system because we get to understand it, and it starts to move. It's, I think, a big part of what's moved the genre to at least hard magic systems being more popular in addition to soft magic systems, which there were a lot more of before Wheel of Time, I think.
Well said. I look at the timeline of modern fantasy, and Robert Jordan always stuck out to me as like the springboard in which a lot of modern authors were able to just catapult into modern day. And it's interesting to say Sanderson because it's no secret that he finished Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
He was a fan of Wheel of Time who was then asked to finish the series, and Sanderson has explicitly cited Wheel of Time as a big influence for him growing up. So it's interesting to compare the two. And yeah, I think this idea of a magic source that has all these different layers to it, that like one can be used by men, one can be used by women, there's all these more harder elements to it. We're like marching slowly towards the 100% hard magic of something like Mistborn, right? Another thing that I find really interesting about channeling, just before we move on, is the fact that how there's a danger in using it, right? There's a limit to
Right.
it, and people are hesitant to use it. Even the female half of the source, right? There's this danger. It's like, oh, if you keep channeling, it's almost like the effect of like they describe it almost like if you were doing a drug where it's like hard to stop and you have to like force yourself to stop channeling, or you could like channel too much and obliterate yourself. So there's always this element of danger to it and hesitation to it that just adds a little spice when you compare it to something like Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf's like this angelic being who can do things and it's glorious and we all hail him for it. It's like all these great people that are channeling are always running a risk and always have to know when to shut themselves off from magic. So those kind of spicy moments were just so influential, very spicy. These spicy moments just captured the imagination of a lot of these modern authors, I think, and you gotta give Wheel of Time props for that.
You definitely have to give Wheel of Time and RJ props for Robert Jordan, props for that. Yeah, that incredible magic system, that really epic series, and I think you said danger and hesitation
Mm-hmm.
there, Charles,
Yep.
which to me, that's that is a lot of what characterizes the Wheel of Time experience is the characters grappling with danger and hesitation.
Yeah.
So
Always good when your magic system kind of personifies your story. The more those two can be
yeah,
intertwined, the better. And this is definitely a world that would be if channeling existed. It affects
yes.
all parts of society.
Well, that world, which apparently doesn't have a name. I think Steven
Randland.
mentioned that to us on our collab for the
He
Eye of
did.
the World, that they just call it Randland
Yeah.
because there is no name. So, but Randland, despite not having a name, is just such a living and breathing world, and such a big part of it is Saiyadin and Sayadar, and how those two things are, or those two forces are, I want to say woven again, and that would make it kind of a pun. So I'll say woven into the world and societies and cultures, which is such a big part of that series. So, yeah, there's a lot to love for sure.
Lots to
About
unpack there, and if you're interested in more of our Wheel of Time discussions, we've had 3 buddy reads so far, and as Dylan mentioned, one of them is with Fantology, and you definitely don't want to miss that one if you're a Wheel of Time fan. So check that one out. And that moves us into our third and final entry for this Magic Systems competition, and this is a series that is close to Dylan and I's hearts. We love this series, and it's one that we've talked about very frequently, including
Yes.
pretty recently as well. We just can't shake it, and that is the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. And we cited both sympathy and naming for this entry. And I know Dylan has a lot to say. I don't think it will surprise anyone that follows us on Twitter about this Kingkiller entry.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sneak in Kingkiller whenever I can justify it in these polls.
Kingkiller makes it to
was
these
an
polls
easy,
a lot. We're
yes.
like the Kingkiller reps on these polls.
And I'll say this was not a hard one to persuade you of, though, Charles.
Right, easy one to justify.
Definitely. And part of what I love in the Kingkiller Chronicle is how Rothfuss just has such a way of walking the line so delicately. He's got such a deft hand with so many things. And a line he walks here is a line between soft and hard magic systems. So we've got on one end naming. Naming is very soft magic system. We don't really understand how it works. It's this idea that if you are able to find the name of something, though we don't really know how one goes about doing that, you can then basically control that thing at its most fundamental level. So the first book is called The Name of the Wind. It's about trying to well, I won't say what it's about, but it's for spoiler reasons, or what I think it's about. But in some ways, I'll talk about this idea of like chasing the name of the wind or trying to understand what the wind's name is. But something like the wind is hard to pin down and truly make rules out of. And because of that, this soft magic system of naming, when it works, it is like really impactful in the way that soft magic systems often are, but it's also not really a toolkit from which our characters can easily draw from. You never know when a name of something is going to be figured out or not figured out, and you never know if it's even going to be used in a way that will help solve problems. A lot of times it creates problems for characters, and that's super interesting. And that's also why I think like naming is used by Patrick Rothfuss more in that way of not necessarily solving problems because we don't understand it. It goes back to that like Sanderson's first law that you need to understand something to be able to use it to solve problems.
Right.
But then on the other side of things, we have sympathy. And sympathy has very explicit rules. It actually draws from like real world mythology. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but like it's a real concept that people like talk about outside of the Kingkiller Chronicle. And I am going to paraphrase from the Kingkiller wiki page on sympathy, which says, sympathy is a system of energy manipulation, considered a form of magic that requires extreme skill and concentration. Sympathy requires a user to create a sympathetic link between two objects so that whatever is done to one object will affect the other. And there's all sorts of intricacies. This page goes much, much longer than that, with 5 entries to the laws, terms, and maxims of sympathy, to 7 known bindings. Yeah. And anyone familiar with Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle knows that he will not step away from giving tons of depth to these things, and the lots of rules that govern sympathy are really interesting. But it's also very interesting in the way that it is. I'm trying to not spoil something that I want to talk about. It parallels a lot of things about the Kingkiller Chronicle, and perhaps even two particular characters' relationship in the Kingkiller Chronicle. I don't know how well I'm doing with the... I'm not going to say names, but I'll say that there's this quote that I've grabbed, which is, the law of sympathy is one of the most basic parts of magic. It states that the more similar two objects are, the greater the sympathetic link. The greater the link, the more easily they influence each other. And I'll say that there's two characters that parallel each other a lot in the Kingkiller Chronicle that I like to talk about. And those two characters are very influential in each other's lives. And I think like sympathy in a lot of ways, the way that having to, not objects in this case, like people who are very similar, like kind of mirror each other, reflect each other, and then influence each other and impact each other a lot. I've always kind of thought that like the link that is created through sympathy is one that is in some ways, I don't know if an analogy, but like similar to the way that these two characters are like each other. I know I had to make it. I'm sorry I had to make it about that, but sympathy is.
You had to make it about that, Dylan.
Yeah, sympathy is very interesting, and there's a lot of depth to it, and of course, it plays a very central role to the way that our characters navigate. I hope it's not a spoiler to say that in some ways the Kingkiller is a school story, and having something that has rules that they learn about in school is very interesting, and it contrasts with the way that, though they like naming is something that is like an element of something you would potentially learn about in school, the way that it's quote unquote taught is like you gotta stop overthinking it, you gotta stop trying to make rules for things, and then maybe you'll understand it.
Right.
So it's just two very like contrasting, interesting magic systems.
No, that's well said, and it makes me think about naming a little bit more. In a recent episode we did about Kingkiller Chronicles, we talked about some of the themes, this idea of like prioritizing journey over destination, and this idea of questions being more interesting than answers, and like stop trying to capture a thing and understand it, just to like enjoy it because. And when you think about naming in that way, like a lot of times naming is most successful when you're not like, it's kind of like this trope we see in fantasy a lot, where the magic comes to you when like it's needed in the moment, and not when you're like trying to puzzle it out and force it to happen. Naming is often most successful when it's a passive thing, when you're just kind of embracing the moment, and that's so much what Kingkiller is about, and naming suits it so well. So Rothfuss is using these traditional tropes in magic systems and fantasy. Naming is not unique to Kingkiller. The idea of knowing the name of something goes way back. And then this idea of just letting it flow through you. Don't try and like pin it down to be able to do it. That's not unique either, but he delicately weaves it in and through the perspective of Kvothe, which when you learn more about him and how it affects him personally, it just adds a layer of ingenuity to it and originality to it that has the Kingkiller's magic systems stand out so much. So I'm a huge fan of this as well, and is a good choice. I wasn't surprised when Dylan brought it to the table, and I didn't fight him either, because it earns its spot in our three.
I think we've never been so easily on the same page about
and we've never so easily had three come to mind either.
Yes,
I don't think.
That's true. Yeah, in any of these awesome Phantology polls. And Charles, I guess something that's coming up for me after talking about all of these magic systems in a row is, you usually, I usually will think of magic systems and like, which ones do I like? It's like, it's the awesome ones, like the ones that are super cool and flashy and stuff like that. And that reminds me, there's Brandon Sanderson's Zeroth Law of magic, which is err on the side of awesome. Yeah. And I've always thought that kind of characterizes these, like what magic systems are really cool and which ones I like the best. But I don't know. When we got into talking about them, I feel like the ones that we end up really choosing for our top magic systems and liking the best are the ones that are most dictate lots of things in the world and very much influence our characters and how they develop.
They're just so ingrained and embedded into the story of these series. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like, I don't know, cool is one thing, and that's great, but really changing the people of the story and really representing the greater themes of the story and being so intricately built into the way that a world works, those kind of things. That's what makes the magic system stand up above all
Yeah,
the
that's well
rest.
said. I mean, the reason like maybe Lord of the Rings isn't on this list, and I don't want to spoil anything in Lord of the Rings, but that magic system is omnipresent in the world of Lord of the Rings, but it doesn't like it's not as ingrained in the politics and in the influence it has over the main characters and things like that as these series that we put on the list
Right.
do. And now that you mentioned, that could be like just our personal taste of what we're looking for
That's true.
in magic. It's like, okay, does the magic system work into the themes of the story, which all of these 100% do, and Lord of the Rings maybe not so much, but love Lord of the Rings obviously. But when we come out, like to me and I guess to us, these standout magic systems have thematic properties to them, and these are huge beloved series, so you got to give props to the magic systems for those reasons.
That's really well said, Charles. And I think that you make a great point about our subjective tastes
Yeah.
there, which is
There's lots of
I guess
really
this is
great
what-
magic
yeah.
systems on this list that we didn't pick that I think are awesome, so
well said.
there's lots of, like, I see Star Wars on here, I see Avatar on here, I see Malazan on
I mean,
here.
Star Wars The Force is, speaking of iconic.
Yeah, iconic. No, yeah, those are all. I was like, ooh, we might have a hard, like, I'm really confident in our choices, but I'm looking at some of these. This is some tough competition.
Charles, one that Rebecca Kwong's The Poppy War trilogy,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think is another one.
Yeah.
We didn't end up picking it here, but if we had a fourth, I think that would be my one, because that's another one that really influences our characters and the world. And
That's a
it's-
great choice.
yeah, I would.
Yeah.
That series is so good, dude.
Yeah, it's a
I'm
great
sorry.
series, and the magic system is a huge part of that. The characterization is another one for that. So it's like characterization, I think, is first for Poppy War, and then magic would be second. So
And magic, I mean, the way it's another thing, and this one would be a spoiler to talk in depth about,
Yeah.
but the way the magic impacts the characters in the Poppy War trilogy is really, really vital to the story and interesting.
and it's complex, it's
Yes.
layered. There's so many other themes that it's kind of woven into, and that it kind of is a metaphor for. So yeah, I mean, check out our Poppy War episodes where we get more into that as well.
If you've read
But
the
that would have
Poppy
probably
War.
been a number 4. I think these series just have the advantage of being older, more established. The last Poppy War book came out just a few months ago, but certainly would be welcome in this competition in our 3 for sure. So
Easily.
that's a great runner-up. So many good runners up here. Lots of great magic systems in fantasy, if you can believe it.
Let's hope. I mean, there's a Fantology recently had a really interesting conversation on one of their, I think on the episode where they introduced this competition,
Mm-hmm.
where they were like, well, what makes something fantasy versus one of the other like genre or subgenre
Fiction,
genre
yeah.
under the, well, not just fiction, but I guess like the speculative fiction or SFF umbrella, right? That's such a big term that encompasses so much, but we do get a sense of, for the most part, you could say, well, this one is sci-fi and this one is fantasy. And then there's other ones where it's like, this one I'm a little less sure, so I'll probably say speculative fiction. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation of like what makes something fantasy versus another genre under speculative fiction. And magic obviously comes up as one of the big things, like whereas sci-fi would use technology to solve the same problems that Sanderson, let's say, might use in his hard magic system.
Right.
It's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And maybe one for another day, Charles.
Maybe one for another day. I mean, that's a great point. Magic systems are a crucial part of a lot of fantasy series, and like this is such a great topic for a contest because there's so many great resources to draw from for your entries here. So kudos to Fantology for this one. I'm excited to see how this contest plays out, and go on Twitter and vote for the FTF podcast when the time comes.
You know what to do,
Yeah,
friends.
That's right, friends. The friend army, roll out. We need
It's
to
not quite
mobilize
Grumpy
the
Army
troops.
levels, but from Lord Grumpy Dark was
Oh
really
gosh, not quite those levels.
Lord Grumpy Dark had an entry.
He's had an entry, but he's a bit of a roguish character, so you
Yeah.
can't expect him to be in line with some of these other contest
He
requirements.
picked all stuff by Levi Jacobs.
Not a bad
which
strat.
was, yeah, friend of the show, Spiffo finalist, Levi Jacobs. And I will say, Levi has incredible magic systems.
And
I
a la
feel
like a Sanderson as well. Too,
Yeah,
so.
a la like a Sanderson, but I'll say, Charles, now that we're reading Wheel of Time, I feel like Levi's magic system in Daughter of Flood and Fury
Yeah,
in a lot of
that's
ways
true.
feels like
I
kind of
see
a
where you're going
more
with that.
like modern perspective of gender
Yeah,
in the way that we were just talking about with the with the way that really I would say it might be more like sex than gender is the way that things play a role in the Wheel of Time
hmm
in the magic system. But I think that Levi's Daughter of Flood and Fury and I guess Tidecaller Chronicles, although only the first one is out so far, is I really appreciated a more contemporary view of like gender based magic system. So
that's well said.
yeah,
Actually,
I'll-
yeah, that's true because we hadn't really read Wheel of Time at the time we were
We had
reading
not.
Daughter of Flood and Fury. So, yeah, if you want to listen to more about Levi Jacobs, check out his book. But also, we interviewed him on the show not too long ago, so
Yes.
go back and check that out as well. Really great guy, great character. That second book's coming out, and we're excited to talk to him again about that. But in the
Yeah,
meantime,
we're-
great magic system as well. Definitely,
Very much
you know.
so. Or tweet at Lord Grumpy Dark, who is the lore expert when it comes to the Tidecaller Chronicles.
That's right. All kinds of great content happening on that guy's Twitter account, so don't forget
Yeah.
about him. Well, Dylan, I think we've said it all. I think, we did a great job talking about these awesome magic systems, and it's always an exciting opportunity. These contests, I should say, are always an exciting opportunity to have a more higher level, spoiler-free discussion about some of these elements of fantasy and standout moments in fantasy literature.
For sure. And thank you again to Fantology for hosting these. You can, once again, you can find the competition itself on Twitter. And the best way to do that would probably be to follow at Fantology_books.
Yeah.
So go ahead and do that. It's always easier to do the promotion stuff, Charles, when it's talking about someone else. I'm like, I feel a bit awkward when we do our own sometimes, but it's fun to be able to say, like, go
follow
Fantology.
them and then wait for their post where they tag us and then
vote
vote for us. Yeah.
100%.
100%.
Yes.
You don't
vote
want
for
one of
us.
these other shows to win. Come on. You
Well,
want?
there's lots of awesome.
Yeah. There's
Those are
lots
my
of
friends,
great
Charles. There's
entries.
lots of awesome people in the
Any
tournament.
one of them is deserving
Vote
of
for-
winning,
yes.
but we all want Friends Talking Fantasy to win. So throw
Well,
that
yeah,
vote out
vote.
there.
Yeah, there's lots of other awesome folks to vote for
Oh, yeah.
up until they face Friends Talking Fantasy.
Then you know
at
what
which
to do.
point vote for us.
Yeah, you guys know what to do. So let's make it happen, guys. Until then, I think we're ready for that sweet outro music.
I think we're ready for that sweet outro music, Charles.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want to support the show, give us a follow over on Twitter at the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end. That is also where you can vote for us in the Fantology poll. So be on the lookout for that coming out soon. We are also on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF Podcast, and you can always send us an email at the ftfpodcast@gmail.com. Now, Dylan, if they're listening and they want to support the show, beyond following us on social media, beyond voting for us in the poll, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts and you go onto that Apple Podcast app, then you can find the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast page, scroll down past all those episodes that you're seeing, and then once you're seeing stars, if you click 5 of those, that would be the best number in order to help support the show. If you have some extra time, then you can always leave us a review, and that would be ridiculously appreciated. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for getting here.
Yes, everybody, thank you so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.